Thank you. All right. Hello. Can you guys hear me okay? If I stand out here and do this, can you guys hear me all right? All right, fantastic. I like to walk around. So, hello. Welcome to San Jacinto. I'm sure you guys have been able to take advantage of the amazing opportunities that we have here that the THC and the San Jacinto Museum and Battlefield Association put on every year with all the amazing displays and hands-on things and the 2 reenactments. It's really an amazing sight to be able to go see things. And here's one of the most famous paintings of the Battle of San Jacinto. I love talking about this, and I get to lecture about it every semester at UNT when I teach Texas history, because what happened here in 18 minutes literally changes the continent of North America, right, in ways that you and I would recognize today, right? 18 minutes that changes how you and I recognize the United States, Mexico, the borders, Texas, all these things that have had enormous consequences in the centuries since come back to the place we're standing in or sitting in right now, in this place, right? So I love telling the story of San Jacinto for a lot of reasons. One of which is that the battle is not well understood, all right? We often remember the Alamo, but we just sort of breeze past what happened at San Jacinto, although the Alamo was a loss and San Jacinto was the win. But also because I like to put San Jacinto into context. You really can't understand this moment and these 18 minutes that changed history if you don't also understand the long road that led here to San Jacinto and why we are at this particular spot, this most unlikely place where all of these things would happen, all right? So I want to tell you it's not just the battle, but the road to this moment, how the battle plays out, and then why that matters, okay? You guys ready? Yes. All right, let's do this. Had a lot of caffeine this morning. All right. So if you want to understand the road to San Jacinto, you really have to start with the fall of the Alamo, okay? Which begins the whole road to where we are. And so I won't get into the whole how did the Texas Revolution begin, but there's a civil war in Mexico. This guy right here, Santa Anna, overthrows the Constitution of 1824. A lot of states in Mexico don't like that. They wanted the Constitution, so a lot of them rebel. Zacatecas rebels, Yucatan will rebel, Texas rebels. So it's one of many states in Mexico that rebel. It's the only one that's going to succeed, but it's not the only one. Santa Anna puts down several of these rebellions. He goes to Zacatecas, puts it down there, and then he marches into Texas. And he comes up here, this is San Antonio. He arrives in February of 1836, surprises the Texans, surrounds the Alamo there, where you have all the famous defenders, the 200-odd men who are in the Alamo, and he lays siege to the Alamo. That's the beginning of our story, really, to San Jacinto. Because while Santa Anna is besieging the Alamo, the rest of Texans here in East Texas are deciding how to react to that. What do we do? We've got to get ourselves organized. They weren't very organized up until this moment. They hadn't put together a big army to oppose Santa Anna. They hadn't even declared independence yet. That's the amazing thing about this. They were very divided amongst themselves up until the moment Santa Anna besieges the Alamo. But when he does, the rest of Texas has to get their act in order. And so they meet at a place called Washington on the Brazos, also a lovely place run by the THC, Texas Historical Commission. And they have a meeting there where they do declare independence on March 2nd, 1836, which also happens to be, you guys recognize this guy here? Sam Houston. It's Sam Houston's birthday. That was just a coincidence. Nobody planned that. But after they declared independence, they recognized we've got to put an army together. All right, we've got to have a defense here. And we've got to ride to the aid of the Alamo. So Houston's put in charge of the army. There is no army. It's him and 3 guys, basically, who then are supposed to go build an army and ride to the relief of the Alamo. So Houston leaves Washington on the Brazos on March 6th, 1836, with 3 other guys. And they ride out to relieve the Alamo. They make it out to Gonzales. You see Gonzales right here? All right, about 70 miles away from San Antonio. And when he gets there, there's about 300 volunteers milling around, all trying to figure out what to do. He starts organizing them. And what Houston couldn't know at that moment is that the day he left, March 6, 1836, is the day that the Alamo itself falls. Right? That's the day that Santa Anna sends his men. They come over the north wall here. There's a giant post office now here at this part. This is where they come flying over the walls, and the Alamo is put to the sword. Every Alamo defender is killed. There's a handful of survivors. Word gets out about what happened at the Alamo. All right? And so word gets over to Houston over here in Gonzales of the fall of the Alamo, and he recognizes there's no saving the Alamo now, and there's nothing stopping Santa Anna from now marching east from here. All right? Now, Houston's men were outraged when they heard what had happened to all the Alamo defenders, and they wanted to fight Santa Anna right then and right there. Many wanted to actually march directly into San Antonio to confront Santa Anna. Here's the problem. Do you see these numbers? Houston has 374 guys who are not organized, who don't have weapons. Many are lacking shoes, much less ammunition, all right? They're angry farmers. They're not well-trained soldiers. By contrast, Santa Anna has, there's estimates at the time, 5,000, 6,000. Roughly speaking, he's got about 6,000 soldiers at his disposal. Look at those numbers. Houston recognizes what I think you can recognize, right? The obvious. He has no chance here, right? The only reasonable thing the man can do is to retreat and to build up an army and try to find an opportune moment to confront Santa Anna. If he goes in like this, he's going to be defeated. And that's the end of the Texas Rebellion. So he's not going to take that chance. He starts retreating, much to the chagrin of many of his soldiers who would just as soon attack Santa Anna right now. All right? So Houston's going to start a retreat. He also wants to get this guy named James Fannin, all right, who's down the coast at a place called Goliad. You guys heard of Goliad? Yes. Fabulous. He's there with about 400 guys, roughly speaking, all right? And so Houston sends an urgent message down to Fannin saying, Fannin, leave Goliad. Retreat back over this way. We'll join up our forces. Your 400 plus my 300 equals 700. That's way better than 300. So he sends an urgent message down to this guy right here. All right, please retreat. And it's more urgent than anyone recognizes because Santa Anna actually has a second army down here under the command of Jose Urrea right here, who's coming up the coast, heading this direction, heading directly toward Fannin. So Houston sends a message to him, please retreat. And Fannin, oh, Fannin. I love this image of Fannin. This is owned by the Dallas Historical Association. This is a wonderful portrait of him where he's got his arms crossed and just sort of pondering off into the distance, which is actually kind of perfect for Fannin because the poor guy meant well, but he wasn't good at making decisions. And when you're in a military command position, you kind of got to make decisions and make them fast. So when he gets word from Houston, a command from his commanding general to please retreat, he goes, let me think about this. For 4 or 5 days, the man thinks about it. He knows Santa Anna is not far. He hears of Urrea coming up the coast, and yet he dithers for some time. Anyway, that becomes a fatal decision. Urrea comes up. It's a long story, but basically surrounds Fannin's men at a place called Coleto Creek, captures them, brings them back to Goliad. They'll all be massacred, all right, at the end of March 1836, which means Fannin's gone. His 400 are gone. Houston's by himself. And now there's 2 armies heading towards him. What should Houston do? Retreat, right? He has no choice. So he makes his way back to the the Colorado River right here. Then he retreats further back to the Brazos River. Then he goes up a little bit north on that while Santa Anna starts making his way east and Urrea comes in as well, all right? As these guys are marching east, as Sam Houston is retreating and the Mexican army is coming in, who is in this area? People. Lots of people. Yes, all the Texas settlers, farmers, people who own plantations, all kinds of stuff. They're in the way, and who's marching toward them? Santa Anna. What would you do in that situation? Run! You would probably run. That's what most Texans did. They ran as fast as they could. As word came to them that Santa Anna's army was approaching, Houston's army is skedaddling, everybody grabbed what few things they had, threw them into saddlebags, into wagons, and then just abandoned their homes, literally overnight. I mean, within hours they would, taking what few things you could gather, and that's it. Because you're afraid if Santa Anna's troops come riding over the hill, what are they going to do to you? Same thing they did to the guys at the Alamo. Same thing they did to the guys at Goliad. They're going to murder you. So you got to leave. So people would gather up all their stuff. They would take off, sometimes on foot, sometimes on horseback, sometimes in a wagon if you're really being ambitious. But in all cases, it was a dreadful experience. This is called the runaway scrape. Right? I like to call it the grand skedaddle. Right? But everybody's just trying to get out of there as fast as they can and head towards Louisiana. But here's the thing, and this is bedeviling also Houston's army and also Santa Anna's army. It was a really rainy spring. All right? It was just pouring down constantly the spring of 1836 when all of this is happening. Which means you have, and there's no cement in this period, right? It's just dirt roads. What you have are muddy bogs everybody's trying to get through. All right? And so people are going, and we have accounts of people trying to escape on these roads who are, every time they take a step on the road, they go down to their knee and higher up under their thigh in the mud. Horses getting stuck, wagons getting so mired they can't move. People in desperation trying to move stuff, just throwing everything they had packed into the wagon, trying to get it going. Afraid at any moment Santa Anna's army is about to ride up behind them and kill them. The panic of all of this is hard to imagine. Right? But it was very real. And this is how most Texans experienced the revolution. Not in Houston's army, but in this. All right? The scariest places were the river crossings. Because today we have bridges. There were no bridges in Texas in 1836. The way you got across the river was Huck Finn style. All right? They had this big old raft basically and a big rope between two sides, and you get on your little ferry and they pull you across, and then they wait for the ferry to come back. All right? So people would pile up right here trying to get across because you don't get many people on the ferry. And where we are today, San Jacinto, was a crossing of the San Jacinto River. It was run by a guy named Nathaniel Lynch. All right, he had a ferry. And so many people trying to get away from Santa Anna's army end up right here at Lynch's ferry trying to get across. And we have several diary accounts of what this looked like at the time. This is an account by a young girl named Delou Rose, who was 10 years old at the time, and she described getting to right where we are as a part of the runway scrape. We arrived at the San Jacinto, which is, say, San Jacinto River, in the night. There were fully 5,000 people at the ferry. Everyone was trying to cross it first, and it was almost a riot. So just imagine you're standing here with your family, your wife or your husband and your children, and you're afraid at any moment people are going to come over the hill and kill you unless you get across the river. Right? That's the tension people are feeling. So who do you think they're mad at? Who's taking the heat for all this?
Houston.
Yes, Houston. Because who is supposed to be defending them? Who's supposed to be organizing the army that would be able to prevent all of this? The general in charge, Sam Houston himself. So something else that we forget but need to appreciate about this moment is the enormous pressure that Sam Houston was under, because he was a human being, like you and I. He felt that pressure at that time, all right? You and I know how this turns out, but he didn't, all right? And everybody at the time thought he was doing the wrong thing. I mean, basically everybody. And so there are people like David Burnett, who was the president of this Republic of Texas that was in rebellion, who sent him a letter telling Houston, "Fight, darn you, fight. The enemy are laughing you to scorn," said Burnett. "You must fight them. You must retreat no farther. The country expects you to fight, darn it. The salvation of the country depends on you doing so." Houston could have turned and fought at any moment, but he knew he was in no position to win. Santa Anna's army was better trained, better equipped, all those. It was battle hardened. It had experience. His troops basically probably had one shot at this, maybe. All right? So you got to make it count. And he did feel the stress, though. This is a great account of, this is him writing. This is Sam Houston talking here. And he says, "You know, I am not easily depressed." He's writing to a friend of his, Thomas J. Rusk. "But before my God, since we parted, I have found the darkest hours of my past life. My excitement has been so great that for 48 hours, 2 straight days, I have not eaten an ounce, nor have I slept." This is no party for Sam Houston. He doesn't think he's riding to glory, right? He is so stressed out about this, the man can't sleep or eat. But he is still doing the thing he thinks is right, and it's going to give Texas its best, possibly only chance at winning this fight. All right? The guts that took was remarkable. But what's Houston doing in all of this, besides building and training an army, is he's waiting for this guy, Santa Anna, to make a mistake. And guess what? Santa Anna makes a mistake. Because it's at this moment that Santa Anna decides that Houston's probably never going to fight. Santa Anna's decided Houston's a coward and is going to run forever. So it's pointless to just keep chasing him to the United States. An effective way to end this war quickly, Santa Anna decides, is to stop chasing Houston and instead chase the Texas government. You can capture those guys. You capture the president of Texas, then you can end this war fairly quickly. So Santa Anna decides to do that, he's got to move more quickly than he's been moving up until now. So he takes a small portion of his army, roughly 800 guys, all right? And they're going to surge ahead with just Santa Anna and try to move quickly to capture the Texas government. So he leaves Houston up there, surges ahead with a smaller force. And that is what Houston's been waiting for Santa Anna to isolate himself with a smaller force so that Houston might have more even odds, all right? Houston will learn about this through some miracle on April 18th, 1836, because a few of Houston's scouts on April 18th basically capture Santa Anna's mail couriers, all right? There's these two guys that are riding along. They've got a big satchel of messages for the Mexican army. Sam Houston's scouts capture them, bring them back, read the mail, and they've got literally Santa Anna's correspondence in front of them. And you know what they learned from that? That Santa Anna is not far away at a place called New Washington. He is isolated from the rest of his army. He's only got about 800 guys, roughly speaking. And Santa Anna doesn't know where the Texas army is. And best of all, they know where he's going. He's going right here to Lynch's Ferry, all right? So this is the San Jacinto River. This is Lynch's Ferry. This is the ferry crossing I was telling you guys about before. Santa Anna was telling his other officers that he's going to be going to Lynch's Ferry, so they should meet him there. So Houston knows where he's going. So Houston sees this sliver of an opportunity, this one chance to possibly corner Santa Anna and possibly win this whole fight. All right? So that depends on Sam Houston getting there before Santa Anna does. All right? So it's a race to Lynch's Ferry. That's how we get at San Jacinto, where we are today. Because Houston, now watch this. This is special animation. I put this together. It took me weeks to do it. Are you guys ready? Watch Sam Houston. There we go. He turns around and he starts, instead of retreating, he goes towards Santa Anna. All right? Rushing to get to Lynch's Ferry before Santa Anna can. All right? And that's how we get here on April 20th, 1836. Houston and his men had marched overnight. In fact, they'd marched basically for 2 straight days to try to get here as quickly as humanly possible. They arrive here in the pre-dawn darkness. They get close to the ferry. They stop for a couple hours, rest up, and then they finish the journey as the sun is rising on April 20th, 1836. So here comes Houston. He's coming on a road called the Harrisburg Road right here. All right? He's coming in right here. Boom, boom. Gets to the ferry and realizes there's no sign of Santa Anna. Woo! We got here first! Yay! Guess we'll wait. So Houston is at the ferry first, which means Santa Anna is going to be coming in this way. See this road down here? This is the road to New Washington. Santa Anna's down here, about 7 miles away. He's going to be marching in this way. So Sam Houston is going to put himself in a good position. He's going to back up from the ferry, come back over here along Buffalo Bayou, because this is all swampy down here. So he comes up in this grove of trees, and he has his men set up camp along the banks of Buffalo Bayou. Why there? Well, because this is a wooded position that's a little bit higher up, which means they can be camped in here, and because of the trees, Santa Anna is not going to be able to see how many of them are there. It'll conceal their position. Does that make sense? It also will protect them from a cavalry charge. One of the big advantages that Santa Anna's army had is they had these what are called dragoons, but just basically cavalrymen with giant lances on them who were very effective in the field. And so if you're in a bunch of trees, you can't have a cavalry charge. Does that make sense? Cavalry, sorry, I keep mispronouncing that. All right, so he's going to set up for those reasons, but also it's on the way from New Washington. Santa Anna literally has to go this way to get over to Lynch's Ferry, so he can't sneak past the Texans. It's the perfect spot, all right? So Sam Houston sets up his men, and they wait. Boop, there he goes. Meanwhile, Santa Anna is marching in from New Washington. New Washington, again, is 7 miles that way. They've been raiding it for 2 days. They set fire to it because, why not burn it down? and Santa Anna's army starts marching this way in the early morning. They arrive here, see, there's Santa Anna. They arrive here around, accounts differ, but roughly midday, all right? And as Santa Anna marches in on the road to New Washington, they see up ahead that the Texans are camped over here. Santa Anna thinks this is great. Sam Houston's not running anymore. Fantastic. And he's stuck between these two rivers. He can't run away. Santa Anna thinks this is a great position. But Santa Anna is nervous because he doesn't have his whole army. He just has a small contingent. So Santa Anna's not quite sure what to do here. So one of the main things he wants to do is figure out how many men does Sam Houston have. So Santa Anna sends up some cavalrymen basically as bait to try to entice the Texans to leave the trees and come out and attack. That way Santa Anna will know just how many of them are there. All right? So he sends up some men. Houston responds by pulling out his two cannons, which are two 6-pound cannons known as the Twin Sisters. All right? And so he fires off the Twin Sisters at Santa Anna's cavalry. The horses rear back. They come back. Santa Anna realizes, okay, this is serious. So Santa Anna has to do, I mean, if they fire a cannon at you, what do you have to do to them? You got to fire your cannon at them, right? So he pulls out his cannon, El Volcan, the volcano, and they basically just shoot at each other with artillery for a couple of hours, all right? And mostly what they hit are trees and branches and not each other. All right, this goes on for a few hours. There's a few injuries on either side, but nothing of great consequence happens. Until about 3:30 when Santa Anna decides, well, I've had enough of this, and he's going to retreat because he feels like there's probably not going to be a fight that day, and they're going to go set up their camp across the field from the Texans. So Santa Anna retreats over here to organize his camp, but he leaves his cannon sticking out over here, kind of unprotected. And one of Houston's officers, one of his more bold officers, was this guy named Sidney Sherman, all right, who is a hoot. I love talking about Sidney Sherman, all right? This guy was very confident in all ways. Sherman looks at the cannon and goes, we should go steal that. That'd be fantastic. Let's go take their cannon. And Houston says, no, we're not doing that. Because what Houston doesn't want to do is provoke a fight before he's ready, all right? He's waited this long. We're not going to do this before we are sure of how many soldiers Santa Anna has, where they're positioned, where our position is, all that sort of stuff. So Sherman and him kind of get in an argument. Finally, Houston says, all right, listen, you cannot charge the cannon. I don't want you to start a fight. But what I will let you do, I will let you do a scouting mission, okay? Go count how many soldiers Santa Anna has. Just go out there and see where their camp is, count up the soldiers. But Sherman, don't start a fight. You promise? Sherman says, of course, I won't do that. So Sherman pulls together about 60 guys on horseback, all volunteer cavalrymen, and he tells them, guess what we're going to do, guys? We're going to go get the cannon, all right? He had one thing he was told not to do. Don't attack. What does he do? Attack. As soon as they clear the tree line, Sidney Sherman and his men start riding at full gallop towards the cannon. What happens in response? The Mexican dragoons see this happen, and then they ride out to attack Sidney Sherman's men, all right? And this becomes a big debacle because Sidney Sherman's men were not really they're not real cavalrymen, all right? They have muzzle-loading rifles, so they would shoot from their horses, and then you have to do to reload their weapons? Get off their horses. So you got to pull your horse to a stop, get off the horse, reload everything, then stand up, and then all that sort of stuff. It made them really vulnerable. So they got surrounded by the cavalry units. They almost got killed. I recreated this entirely in PowerPoint. Again, I'm very proud of myself and my storytelling skills here. But here's Sherman. He comes out for the cannon, gets surrounded by cavalrymen, and then basically the Texans have to retreat. All right? And this makes Houston just livid. All right? I'm pretty sure he gives Sherman a good yelling at the end of all of this. But a few Texans almost get killed in this whole mix, but they get back safely, and then Santa Anna moves his cannon back over here. All right? That's the end of the first day, April 20th, 1836. All right? And then overnight, both sides are going to dig in and be ready for battle the next morning. All right? Houston's men, get a meal, get encamped, pay attention to their weapons, get them ready for the next day. They're very excited because they've been waiting for this fight for oh so very long. All right. Santa Anna's men spend most of the night setting up a large barricade, or what are called breastworks, right in front of their position. Basically, a giant pile of stuff to protect them, right? So crates and saddles and brush and turned over wagons and just basically lots and lots of crap thrown on top of themselves because they're afraid they're going to get attacked at dawn the next morning. That's what Santa Anna was convinced was going to happen, is that at dawn the next morning, the Texans would come tearing over. So the Mexicans build a 4-foot-high barricade to be behind with their cannon, the volcano, right over here in the middle of it, waiting. And they're up all night doing this. They're exhausted. Santa Anna later writes in his memoirs, he was up all night preparing and watching for all this stuff. And then dawn breaks. And they're in battle position. They're waiting for an attack. Waiting. Does it come? No. The Texans wake up pretty early. But you know who's sound asleep in the morning of April 21st, 1836? Sam Houston. He went to bed at about 4 or 5 a.m. and left orders to not be bothered unless something important happened. All right? He was exhausted. He wasn't going to attack first thing, so he decided to get a few hours of sleep. All right? So he's sleeping in. Santa Anna's troops are braced for attack at any moment. And then Houston gets awoken at 9:30 in the morning, because you know who does start showing up at 9:30? Reinforcements for Santa Anna under General Coss, all right, who had been marching overnight with his men to try to reinforce Santa Anna as quick as humanly possible. And so about 400 or 500 men come in at about 9:30 in the morning, coming down this road here. As they get closer here, they swing out in this wide field right in front of all the Texans. So all the Texans see the reinforcements coming in. So Coss comes in here, brings in reinforcements, and that's a crucial shift. Because now Santa Anna has a lot more men. When he arrived, he had 850 guys. Houston had 930. Basically even odds, but there's a little bit more in favor of the Texans here. But now, with Coss's reinforcements, Santa Anna now has 1,250 men to Houston's 930, which, by the way, Houston was convinced he had 750, and he thinks Santa Anna has 1,500. So Sam Houston thinks that Santa Anna now has twice as many men as he does. That's the situation that he's facing. It's not quite that bad, but that's what Houston is concerned is happening. All right? So the odds have shifted. All right? And so Houston, in the aftermath of this, decides about midday on the 21st to hold a council of war. It's the only time he brought all of his officers together to say, what should we do? And so all of his officers get together, and the question is, it's not whether or not we're going to fight. Everybody agreed today was going to be a great battle. All right? The question is, do we attack or do we wait to be attacked? All right? And so the Texans decided ultimately they should wait to be attacked. You know why? They've got a great position in the trees. It'd be hard for Santa Anna to attack them. They've got an advantage there. All right? They think Santa Anna has twice as many men. And if you're going to attack Santa Anna, you've got to run your men across basically a mile of open prairie. All right, that is very vulnerable position to be in as you're running across the field, hoping you don't get shot on your way over to Santa Anna's lines. All right? So they decide to wait, but here's the problem with waiting. If you wait any longer, what could Santa Anna get more of? More reinforcements, right? That had already happened. Many more could be on the way. So Sam Houston decides at that moment that if they're going to wait, they got to make sure Santa Anna doesn't get even more men. So there's a bridge back this way. This is the road in, right here. This is the Harrisburg Road. There's a bridge about 7-8 miles this direction over here. Is the only bridge over a bayou that you can come in. All right? That's how Coss had gotten there. Houston decides to burn that bridge to prevent any more reinforcements from coming in. So he sends his most trusted scout, a guy named Erastus Deaf Smith. He was known as deaf because he lost most of his hearing as a childhood illness. But he had been involved in the Texas Revolution since the Battle of Behar in December of 1835 in San Antonio. And he was really Houston's most trusted right-hand man. And so he sends Deaf Smith with about 6 other guys to go burn the bridge. And so they leave about midday, April 21st, ride 7-8 miles over to what's called Vince's Bayou, Vince's Bridge. And they go over there, they burn it, and then they hack at it, and then they smash it, and finally the whole thing collapses into the river. And when they do that, this is a crucial moment because now they've isolated themselves. Santa Anna can't get more reinforcements. Yes, but the Texans now have no way to retreat, and neither does Santa Anna. So now there's going to be a battle, and now it's fight or die. That's what's happened. All right? Meanwhile, by this point, it's about 2:30, 3 in the afternoon, and Santa Anna has decided the Texans are not going to fight today. All right? So Santa Anna, you remember, he had been up all night building those protective breastworks. Then at dawn, his men had been ready in attack position, waiting for an attack. It hadn't come at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10, 11, noon, 1, 2. And by this point, Santa Anna's peering out across the field and going, those guys aren't doing anything. They're probably not going to attack. And so Santa Anna made one of the most strategically important and blunderous mistakes of the entire campaign, because it is at this moment that Santa Anna orders his men to stand down. Now, what does that mean? It means they don't have to be in battle position, right? And they can do any number of things, all right? These guys, you got to understand, on Santa Anna's side, they had been up for 24 to 48 hours, most of them. They had been up all night working. They'd been in battle formation this entire time. They hadn't had a meal. They hadn't had any rest. They hadn't had any of those things, all right? And Santa Anna decided if the Texans aren't going to attack, his plan was now to attack at dawn the next morning. If you're going to do that, your guys got to rest at some point, right? So he told them to stand down as a strategic move. Now is a good opportunity to rest, have them eat some food, rest a little bit. They'll be prepared now for the next day. When I took 4th and 7th grade Texas history, my teacher said that it was at this moment that all the Mexican army took a nap. That's not quite what happened, all right? It's a strategic decision, all right, to take this opportunity. It just happens to be at the worst possible moment. Because when Santa Anna makes that order, that is also remarkably, amazingly, almost miraculously, the exact same moment that Sam Houston picks to line up his men for an attack across this field. Why he changed his mind on attacking, we don't know. Why he picked that moment, we don't know. But it was one of the most remarkable and important and influential moments, not just in Texas history, but I would say in North American history. 3:30 in the afternoon, which is approximately around where we are right now, April 21st, 1836. All right? He lines up his men in 2 rows right here with the twin sisters essentially at the center right there. Santa Anna's army, they are resting. They still have sentries posted. They still have people on lookout. They're still aware that Sam Houston's army is only a mile away, but they've let down their guard, and they can't really see them over here because there's a big hill, not big hill, there's a ridge right here that these guys are behind, so they can't quite see all the way over here. And this is a little depression you can't see anymore, where they're kind of hidden from view as they're lining up, all right? So they're getting into position. Now, it wasn't just Anglo-Americans who were in Sam Houston's army, all right? There were also Tejanos, which is to say Mexicans native to Texas, who were in Sam Houston's army. Not a lot of them, but they're very important. This is Juan Seguin. This is Antonio Menchaca. These guys are both from San Antonio. Juan Seguin had actually been in the Alamo. He was one of the messengers out of the Alamo. And he was the one in charge of the Tejanos in Sam Houston's army. And Houston, as they're lining up, tells them, you guys aren't going to fight, because I don't want you guys to get killed by friendly fire when the fighting begins. So I'm going to leave you guys behind, and you guys are going to guard the camp and our baggage. These guys were not having it, and particularly Antonio Menchaca here. They go to Sam Houston and say, no, this is our fight as much as it is your fight, and we demand that we are in the fight and the attack itself. And so Houston agrees. He has them put cards in their hats so that they won't be mistaken for Santa Anna's troops. And then they are on the Texan far left to the far right, right here, under Colonel Sidney Sherman over here that's going to come over on this side. All right? So they line up about 3:30 or so in the afternoon. Houston's in front, pacing on a big gray horse. And then, in utter silence, they start making their way across the mile that separated them from Santa Anna. And what you can't see here is that there's like basically waist-high grass that they're making their way through. And you can imagine this adrenaline coursing through all of these men. They've been waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks for this very moment. Here it is at hand, and they can't make a sound. Because if they make any screams, any yells, they're going to alert all of Santa Anna's camp. All right? So they start making their way across. They start picking up the pace. They run across the field. The side that goes the quickest is Sidney Sherman, because this guy, he's always in a hurry. And Sherman and his men get over here, and they surprise the far right, to the far left over there, but the far right of the Mexican lines over here. This is where the first shots of the Battle of San Jacinto are fired over here, where Juan Seguin and Antonio Menchaca under Colonel Sidney Sherman, where the flag that was often associated with the Battle of San Jacinto is actually being flying. It's all happening right over here. And when that happens, they utterly, completely surprise Santa Anna's troops, some of whom were asleep, some of whom were eating, but they were not prepared for this moment. They had just put their guard down. And suddenly the Texans are showing up shooting. The Mexicans on this side quickly raise the alarm, jump to position, and it's just mad chaos behind Santa Anna's lines. People are running around, screaming, yelling, trying to get back into position. Meanwhile, Sam Houston and the main lines right here, they crest the hill where we are, and right now we're in the San Jacinto Monument. It's right about here, so we're very close to the spot where this happens. They come over this ridge line right here, and they stop. And they fire off the Twin Sisters, just boom, boom, right over here, smashing into the Mexican breastworks, all right? And then Sam Houston brings his men forward, and he stops them in line. They're all standing in this one line right here, and he orders them to fire at Santa Anna's troops. Meanwhile, Santa Anna's troops right over here, they get scrambled kind of into position, but it's absolute chaos, and they fire off a couple of rounds. And the first round that they fire goes over the Texan's head, because they're putting it over a 4-foot barricade, so they're aiming too high. One Texan later wrote that if you held your hat up above your head, it would have caught at least 20 bullets. All right? So the first round flies over them. Houston then tells his men to fire, and they all fire one cool volley, just all at once. Boom, across the line. Now, at this moment, if you are a well-trained 19th century military crew, here's what you're supposed to do. Stop, reload your muzzle loader, and then wait for the order to fire again. But we're the Texans, a well-trained military force at this time. They were not. So Houston tries to tell them to reload and get back into position. What do the Texans do instead? Ah! And they come flying forward and leap over this barricade in this massive, unhinged explosion of anger, angst, and everything that they've been holding in on themselves this entire time. So when you see this painting, which is in the Capitol building in Austin, Texas today, if you can go see it in person, right? This is the breastworks right here that are being breached as they're flying over. This is the flag that Sidney Sherman's men were bringing with them, and they're all literally throwing themselves over the barricades over here. And when they're doing this, they've already fired their weapons. They're not going to stop and reload. What they're doing instead is they're taking their rifles over like massive clubs and smashing into anyone and everyone that they can possibly get, pulling out Bowie knives, daggers, anything they have, sometimes tomahawks, and slashing and smashing every person that they can get their hands on as they quickly overwhelm the lines of Santa Anna's men. Santa Anna's men are overrun. They are destroyed. And so the battle is over in a very short period of time. It's only 18 minutes, which I was always like, who had a stopwatch? It's like, all right, go guys. Okay, 18 minutes, fantastic, great time. That number actually comes from Sam Houston in his after-battle report. He actually writes, it took about 18 minutes or so, right? But that's from like the moment they open fire right here to when they have the camp. It's less than 20 minutes, right? And so they go in, they have control. The Battle of San Jacinto is over. But the killing continues for hours and hours after that, all right? Because what happened is that you have Santa Anna's men who, when they're overrun, and that happens so fast because they never get into position, basically, they start running for their lives every which way they can possibly go. So all these little arrows going every which direction. That's just terrified men running. Most of them threw down their weapons, threw up their hands, and ran. All right? The Texians who are following them are taking revenge. They're taking revenge for Goliad. They're taking revenge for the Alamo. And so they are smashing people's skulls in. They are stabbing people. They are not taking surrenders, right? Everything that happened at the Alamo and happened at Goliad also happens at San Jacinto, but in reverse, all right? And so some of these guys who are running are trying to throw their hands up and surrender and are not being accepted for their surrender. Sam Houston tries to stop this a couple of different times. His men aren't listening to him. They barely listened to him the entire time on the way to San Jacinto. They're definitely not listening to him now, all right? So he tries, he can't stop them. At one point he says, "Damn your manners, people," and he rides off, all right? We have a lot of stories about what happened here. So this is a gentleman who was much younger at the time. This is a painting from later in life, but this is Moses Austin Bryan, who was a nephew of Stephen F. Austin, the main American colonist or colonizer who was bringing Americans into Mexico. He was here at San Jacinto. He was a soldier in Sam Houston's army. He found a Mexican drummer boy, about 10 years old, in the camp, who had had both his legs broken in the fight, and he was struggling along on the ground. He tried to protect that drummer boy, but some of the other Texas soldiers came up and shot the drummer boy in the head and ran on. John Austin Wharton here also tried to stop the men from killing unarmed Mexican soldiers. And at one point, he pulls another Mexican officer up on his horse to protect him, because he figures if he's on his horse with me, no one's going to shoot him. Pulls him up behind him, and then Texan soldier comes up and just shoots him right off the horse, right behind John Austin Wharton. All right? And so that continued over here. Some of the worst of it happens in we call it Peggy's Lake, but basically the marshy swamp back here. You guys remember 1836? It's raining constantly. This is all a muddy, massive bog out here, all right? And so this is why all the soldiers run out here. The Mexican soldiers just throw themselves into this, and they're just waist deep in mud, muck, and water, trying to swim and crawl their way through it. They're just getting shot down. Texas soldiers are sitting right here, aiming and firing at these guys and taking out as many as they possibly can, all right? One of the Mexican soldiers who survives this, Pedro Delgado, later describes it as that this area right here is, quote, where the greatest carnage took place. The best example of all of this is the pent-up anger and angst that happened is, again, John Wharton over here. He gets over here and tries to order these guys to stop shooting unarmed soldiers who are running away. And he tells one guy, Joe Dixon, for crying out loud, "Stop it." Joe Dixon turns around and tells John Wharton, quote, "If Jesus Christ were to come down from heaven and order me to quit shooting, I wouldn't do it, sir." And then he aims his weapon at John Wharton and cocks it. John Wharton backs off at this point and walks away. And I say all that to tell you guys, that's a major part of the story that you have to understand, but it's also a part of the longer story. The anger and angst of the longer Texas Revolution is what leads to this moment. You have to have a bigger understanding of the story of how you get to San Jacinto if you're going to understand the aftermath of the battle and how that played out. All right? So, eventually it gets too dark to shoot. That's really what ends the killing in the aftermath of the Texas Revolution. The survivors of Santa Anna's army are organized under a guy named Juan Almonte, who's got a fascinating story too we don't have time to get into. But he provides the official surrender of Santa Anna's army to Sam Houston's, and that is the end of the battle and the aftermath of San Jacinto. There's about 630 of Santa Anna's soldiers who were dead on the field, about 730, roughly speaking, who were captured. But here's the thing. Nobody knew where Santa Anna was. And that was the most important part. If you don't have Santa Anna, I'm not saying this doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter like it needs to matter. Does that make sense? So everyone's asking, where is Santa Anna? Is he among the dead? They're looking for his body. They don't find it. Is he among the captured? They ask everybody. Not even his own soldiers know where Santa Anna is. So where was Santa Anna throughout all of this? Well, he had told his men to stand down, and he himself decided to stand down. And so we have an account of him. He actually wrote down a memoir of this whole experience. And according to Santa Anna, he had been over here, so here's supposedly his tent right over here, and he had laid down for a nap. Not in his tent. According to him, it was under a tree. All right? Lays down, puts his head down. He hadn't slept in basically 36 hours up until this point. All right? So he is dead out of sleep, according to his own account, when the firing over here begins. And he wakes up in a start. And really, he wakes up to his worst nightmare, right? He wakes up to the attack. He hears the screaming and yelling of, remember the Alamo, remember La Bahias. The Texans are coming over, firing, shooting, screaming. He runs up to the barricades and tries to organize a defense quickly, but it's chaos. It's utter destruction everywhere. And it's very apparent very quickly there's no saving this situation. So if you can't save the situation, maybe you can save yourself. So Santa Anna decides to save himself. And so he hops on a horse right over here, and you can see this little line right here, Santa Anna's escape route. He comes flying out this direction on horseback, riding away. All right? He's actually chased by several Texas horsemen who don't know it's Santa Anna. They just see someone fleeing the battlefield, and they pursue. And so he rides hard and fast as quickly as he can, and he's trying to get away. What is he trying to do? Save his own life, yes. But where's the rest of his army?
Down south.
Yeah, not far away. It's at the Brazos River. All right, the majority of his army, he only had a small contingent of his army at San Jacinto. The majority of his army is at the Brazos River, 5,000 or so. If Santa Anna can get to those 5,000, what can he do? Come back with them and defeat Sam Houston and possibly save face on all of this. He gets as far as Vince's Bridge. But what had happened to Vince's Bridge? It's gone. It's been burned and destroyed. And so he can't get across the river. And so instead of escaping, he ditches his horse and hides in the weeds overnight because there's Texas horsemen chasing him, looking for him, all kinds of scouting parties trying to find anyone who'd escaped. And he spends a miserable night in the brush next to the bayou. All right? He's captured the next morning trying to escape. Around 11 a.m. or so, there's a scouting party of Texans who ride up. They find him. They don't know who he is, but they decide to grab him. They bring him into camp. And as soon as he comes into camp, it becomes very obvious who he is. Right? He is Generalissimo Santana. All of his men stand up and salute him, say El Presidente, and it's very apparent very quickly he is Santa Anna. That moment is why San Jacinto becomes San Jacinto, because they've captured the president of Mexico, right? And in so doing, they're able to end the war in a way Sam Houston never would have been able to end the war with just the Battle of San Jacinto, because they can use Santa Anna basically as a bargaining tool. And so they do. They have Santa Anna order the rest of his armies out of Texas, and they have Santa Anna sign the treaties of Velasco that ends the Texas Revolution. And what does that produce? Texas becomes independent. Texas will go on, as you know, I know you guys know this, but for 9 whole years to be its own independent republic, as we like to remind the rest of the country on a regular basis, right? And then in 1845, Texas will join the United States, all right? And when we do, that will begin a war with Mexico over here about the fate of Texas and ultimately the American Southwest, all right? That will lead to all this land between Texas and California to be brought into the United States. That makes the United States a transcontinental nation from sea to shining sea. That comes from these moments and will transform not just Texas, not just Mexico, but the United States, because the fights over this Western territory is ultimately going to lead to the American Civil War as well, which redefines citizenship in this country and how we understand the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, voting rights, constitutionalism, citizenship. All these things come from this moment. So those 18 minutes that happened here have had such an enormous impact because it reshapes the entire continent. And you can't understand the modern landscape of the United States, Mexico, and North America unless you understand both the road to and the Battle of San Jacinto itself. Thank you guys for listening to me. I really appreciate it.